Hi friends, I'm Coley, this is Sweet Peaches Nutrition, and today we're talking all about roasting. And not a comedic roast, but a cooking roast. So as the weather gets cooler and more vegetables come into season, like root vegetables and winter squashes that are hardier and thicker, roasting is a great tool to get the most flavor out of your vegetables while enjoying their nutritious benefits as well. So, roasting is a dry heat at a high temperature, so often in the oven. Mostly ovens are places where you have dry heat unless you add some sort of bain-marie or water bath in with whatever you're cooking to create steam. And I like to roast most everything at around 400 degrees. I like to bump it up a little bit from the usual 350, which I feel like is kind of like when in doubt, cook something at 350. I like to bump it up to 400, get a little more browning and crispiness without completely charring the outside of your vegetable. When we're talking about things like butternut squash and sweet potatoes and beets and other hard vegetables, you want to make sure that you can cook them long enough so the insides get soft and the outsides get crispy. Okay, so why roasting? Roasting is a really nice way to bring out flavors in your vegetables that you might not get from like boiling or steaming, because when you cook these vegetables at a high heat, you are caramelizing the natural sugars in the vegetables. So even though vegetables always don't taste as sweet as fruits do, they still have a lot of natural sugars in them. And when you cook at this high heat, you caramelize those sugars, and that's what gets you that nice brown, crispy outer coating that you wouldn't get if you were steaming or boiling your vegetables. Think about roasting a potato in the oven versus boiling it to make mashed potatoes. You get two very different tastes of your potato. It'll also bring out the sweetness of your vegetable. So in things like a butternut squash, it's actually a really sweet vegetable, and when you roast it, you will notice that you pull out those sugars and highlight the sweetness. Similar to onions, a raw onion and a caramelized onion tastes very different, and a caramelized onion is very sweet. So if you're unsure about vegetables and you are trying to get a good flavor on them, roasting can be a really good tool to make them a little sweeter and a little crisper. That'll make it more appetizing, in my opinion. So what is the key to roasting? I'd say the biggest thing is even-sized pieces. Now, you don't have to get out your ruler, it doesn't have to be perfect, but you want your pieces of whatever you're cooking to be roughly the same size, because then they will cook evenly through. If you have a super small piece, it'll get charred, while your big piece will still be kind of hard in the middle. So, for example, like if I'm cutting new potatoes, I usually cut them into eighths, cut them in half, and then cut each half into fourths, and that's usually a good size. If I get a giant potato, then I usually will cut each half into sixths so that they're similar in size to the other pieces. Or if you get a super small potato, you might cut it into fourths, just kind of roughly adjusting like that. Like I said, it doesn't have to be perfect, but you don't want your pieces to be drastically different. Even when I buy pre-cut butternut squash, I still will go through and chop up some of the bigger pieces just to make sure that they're all about the same size, because I want them to cook evenly. A note about Brussels sprouts: if you've never cooked them before, the best way is to chop off the root end that is holding them together, and then you can cut them in either halves or fourths, depending on what you're using them for or how small you'd want the pieces. If some of the outer leaves fall off in the process, don't worry about it. Those tend to be more bitter anyway, so if you're not completely sold on Brussels sprouts, you might want to remove those more bitter leaves. And then if you start to lose a bunch of leaves, you can still cook them and they get super crisp and delicious, but just note that the little individual leaves will cook quicker than the whole bunch of the Brussels sprout, and so you might want to stop about halfway through and take off those pieces and enjoy your sprouts chips. But if you leave them in for the whole cooking time, they'll get pretty browned and charred, which may be delicious or may be a little too burnt for your liking, so just a heads up on that one. Another way that you can ensure that you get nice crispy outsides on your vegetables is to put the flat side down. So, for example, if you're cooking Brussels sprouts and you really want it to get a nice char if you cut them in half and put all of the cut sides down, then that'll get a really nice brown coating on it. Now this kind of depends for me, like what I'm cooking, what dish it's going in, and like how much I actually care, because obviously it takes more work to lay out pieces on a baking sheet all facing one way versus just tossing them in a bowl and dumping them out. But if you're trying to get a really nice crisp edge, if you take the time to make sure your flat sides are down, and if you flip halfway through, then you can get crispy pieces. Okay, so this is probably the most important thing. If you have tried to roast things and they have not come out quite like you wanted, listen up. Do not overcrowd your pan. I know it's hard, I know it's tempting, you don't want to get out another baking sheet, or you already have 2 sheets in the oven and you don't want to wait to cook the rest of your things, but do not crowd your pan. Because if you have too many vegetables on your baking sheet and there's not enough room for air to circulate around them, they won't brown, they'll steam. As vegetables cook, they release moisture, and if they're too close to the other pieces, that moisture will just steam them and they won't get brown and crispy. So if you're going for crisp, which usually is more appetizing, don't crowd your pan. So if I'm cooking potatoes, for example, I usually will do 2 baking sheets, and I will make sure they are spread out, and then even if I need to do a 3rd or 4th, depending on how much I'm cooking, I'll make sure the potatoes have space. I will cook them for about 30 minutes, and then halfway through, I flip the pans on the rack, because anything that is on the top rack will get crispier because it's closer to the heating element, and so I like to make sure that they get an even chance at being on top. And so about halfway through, I will shake the individual pieces to make sure they get flipped around and maybe another side will get crispy, as well as switching the position of the pans to make sure that my 2 pans cook evenly. Ideally, you would only put 1 pan at a time. That would be like best case scenario, would get you the most crispy result, but I don't have time for that, so I just make sure that I rotate my pans to get even cooking. So I talked about roasting butternut squash brings out the flavor and makes it so amazing. I talked about roasting potatoes. I really like roasting Brussels sprouts. I mean, roasting or grilling are really the only way to eat Brussels sprouts in my mind. And if you haven't tried roasted Brussels sprouts, give them a try at least once, because they get a bad rap because they used to be boiled. They used to be cooked wrong, and that's why Brussels sprouts were a joke, but if you cook them well, they're good. Another thing that I love to roast is chickpeas. So chickpeas are a good source of plant protein, and they go great as a topping of salads and rice bowls. And you can roast them in the oven for 20 to 30 minutes, coated with whatever seasoning you want, and they come out really great. So I definitely recommend that as well.
While I've got the oven on, another one of my favorite things to roast is a head of garlic. It really changes the flavor of the garlic. So you're just going to want to cut open the top of the head with a sharper knife than I have to expose all of the cloves. If there's some kind of off the side, you might want to go in and cut those open. And then we are going to wrap it up in some aluminum foil with oil and let it roast in the oven for about 40 minutes until it gets brown and smells sweet. And then once it's finished, let it cool for a little bit, and then you can just kind of squeeze out the individual cloves. They'll be a lot softer, and I just store them in a small container in my fridge. It makes almost like a garlic paste, and then you can add it to anything you're cooking, and the roasted flavor just brings out a nice sweetness, unlike raw garlic or just garlic that has been sauteed.
We've talked about what you can roast, why you might roast it, and how to roast it, but we haven't talked about the most important thing, is that these vegetables have such good flavor is that you don't necessarily need to coat them in a bunch of seasoning. If you toss your vegetable in a little bit of a neutral oil, I like to use avocado oil, and sprinkle with salt and pepper and give it a good toss, that is like a foolproof way to cook your vegetables. You know, you could flavor them with things like curry powder, paprika, 5-spice, za'atar, whatever you're feeling, but if you just want to let the flavor of the vegetables shine through, a little bit of oil, salt, and pepper is a great way to prepare these veggies, and then they're kind of a blank slate for whatever dish you want to put them in. So yesterday I batch cooked a bunch of vegetables. I roasted them all up so they're ready to go in my fridge. And my last tip for you is the best way to reheat these. So you could totally throw them in the microwave and eat them, but they're not gonna have that same crisp that they do coming right out of the oven. So there are 2 tricks. One, if you have an air fryer, you can throw them in the air fryer for a couple minutes, or you could even put them back in your oven for a little bit to warm them up. Or if you throw them into a skillet with some oil and saute them, it'll bring back some of that crispness, especially like potatoes, and then you can enjoy them again. So that is a crash course in how to roast vegetables. It really is my preferred way of cooking, aside from sauteing up vegetables if I'm using them in a dish. Roasting just brings out the best qualities of vegetables, in my opinion. And so if you're leery about trying a new veggie, try roasting it. It might be your best bet to liking it. If you have any questions, leave them in the comments below and I will try to answer them for you. And I will see you guys in the next video. Bye!